let's come to the point of discussion of answers. We have finished with the entire description, explanation of the chapter which deals with the respiratory tract, respiratory organs, and we move ahead with the discussion of question answers. Now, let's begin with the short answers. I have written 2 or 3 mark questions because the questions can be asked for either 2 marks or 3 marks, and it can be also asked for 4 or 5 marks. We have just tried to broadly group the questions into 2 categories. Now, as we discuss the answers, I'll tell you how to add upon the points if it is asked for more marks. Describe the structure of lungs. Now here, describe the structure of lungs, it usually will never be asked for a 2 mark question. It will be either 3 or 4, and if it is asked for 4 or 5 marks, you will have to draw the diagram of lungs over there. Only the external structure, because they have not touched upon the internal part. It is just structure of lungs. Now here in this answer, you will have to mention about, lungs are a paired structure, right? And you will have to mention about the pleural membranes, right? So your pleural membranes need to be mentioned here as they separate out the lungs from the remaining organs in the thoracic cavity. Then in pleural membranes, you also have to mention about the parietal membrane and the visceral membrane. Visceral is the inner one, parietal is the outer membrane. Between the 2 membranes, there is a fluid. The pleural fluid fills the cavity between the 2 membranes. Then you need to write about the right lung is larger, slightly larger than the left lung. That you have to mention. Now, why you have to mention this? Because you also have to say about the heart being present, it's right in the front of the lungs, that is ventral to the lungs is the heart. Now, to accommodate the heart, the left lung is slightly smaller than the right lung. Now, the lobes of the lung, now that the lungs are pinkish in color, muscular structure, where the right lung is divided into 3 lobes, and left lung is divided into 2 lobes by the fissures. So here you will mention about the horizontal and oblique fissure that divides the right lung into 3 lobes, and in the left lung you have to mention about the oblique fissure that just divides the left lung into 2 parts. Now, if it is for 3 marks, your answer ends over here. Yes, you can also write about the mediastinum, the central part, the part which is dividing the 2 lungs, the center part. It is called as the mediastinum, that you can write. And when it is asked for a 5 mark question, you need to add upon the structure inside little bit, not in details. You will say that it is consisting of the air sacs or the alveolar sacs. You can mention about the bronchi and bronchioles and all that, maybe a point or 2, and diagram will suffice for a 5 mark question. So that takes care of the structure of lungs. You can mention that there is a diaphragm which separates the thoracic cavity in which the lungs are present. So just between the lungs and the abdominal region, there is this dome-shaped structure called diaphragm. That also you can add. Now coming to the next question, describe the process of inspiration. Now here, since it's just for a 3 mark question or 2 mark question, inspiration, but it can be added, inspiration and expiration, as you move on to a longer answer or a 5 mark answer. Now when we write about inspiration, you have to mention about the intercostal muscles. So you need to mention about the rib cage. You need to mention about, let's just jot it down quickly, rib cage. Then you can mention about the intercostal muscles that play a major role in inspiration. Then you can also write about the movement of the diaphragm. That also needs to be mentioned over here. Now, when we explain this answer, how does inspiration take place? Because of the movement of the combined movement, you have to mention that the combined movement of the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, the rib cage is lifted upwards and outwards. That increases the thoracic, the cavity, the volume inside the lungs increases, and the air pressure decreases. As a result of that, outside air just rushes in through the nostrils and enters the trachea and reaches the lungs. So that is how you will have to explain in details about the process of inspiration. Now, this question is usually not asked for a 5-mark question. So this points will suffice for your answer, the movement of the rib cage along with the movement of diaphragm and intercostal muscles. You will have to mention about movement of the rib cage upwards and outwards. These two words have to be incorporated in the answer. You will have to mention the difference between the pressure. The air pressure outside is less and inside is, inside is less and outside is more, and so the air rushes inside, and that is how the air moves in or inspiration takes place. Maybe you can write the control center that lies in the medulla oblongata. That is not required, but if you want, you can just add upon that point. Next is enumerate the functions of nasal chamber. Now, here you need not mention about the nasal cavity, the description of nasal cavity, but usually describe the nasal cavity along with, or add a note on functions of nasal chamber can be combined, and you can write the answer for 5 marks. So you can mention about the nasal cavity, the vestibular cavity, the olfactory region. All that can be mentioned when you are describing the regions, and as the functions are straightforward, you will point it down and write the functions. In the functions, you will have to mention about presence of mucus, which makes the air moist and it helps in the movement of the air easy. Then the temperature, that needs to be added here. Now what happens? Temperature, irrespective of outside temperature, as we had discussed during the explanation, I had told that you might be in some freezing zone and the air outside is minus degrees, or you are maybe somewhere in a very extremely hot area, some desert where the temperatures are really scorching. The air that enters the lungs will be brought to the body temperature level, and that is done in the nasal chamber, right? So because of the blood supply and the mucus there, that affects the temperature and it is controlled. It works like air conditioner. It conditions the air as per the body, and then the air moves inside. So that point has to be added. Then you mention about the filtering process that takes place in the nasal chamber, that is the dust. There are the suspended particles that are trapped in the nasal chamber thanks to the hair, the fine hair that is present in the inner lining of the nasal chambers, and that traps the mucus and the fine hair will help in filtering the air of dust and particles, which will then let the clean air enter inside the trachea. Then you need to mention about the adenoid cells. Now these adenoid cells are antibacterial. They kill the bacteria that come enter the nasal chambers, and these adenoid cells are part of the pharyngeal tonsils. So the mention of adenoid cells is also very important when you're talking about the nasal chamber. So these points will take care of the functions of nasal chamber. And then we move on to the next. What is meant by bronchitis? Mention its causes and symptoms. Now here, this can be asked for a 4-mark question also. What is meant by bronchitis? So first you have to explain what is bronchitis. You will mention that it is the inflammation of the bronchi or the bronchioles that are the part of the respiratory pathway or respiratory tract. Now this condition, mention its causes. So when they have specifically asked in separate sections, you will write the definition. Your answer will first have the definition or explanation of bronchitis. The term you will have to explain what is bronchitis. Then next part of the answer will be the causes of bronchitis, and the next part of the answer will be then symptoms of bronchitis. Now causes, what causes bronchitis? We had discussed that there are various causes, one being it could be even caused by a pathogen, it could be caused by pollution, and this causes the inflammation, the inner lining of the nasal pathway, or sorry, the inner lining of the bronchioles or bronchi. They are affected and they start undergoing hyperplasia and hypertrophy. So in causes you will mention about these two terms, that is hyperplasia, and you will also mention about hypertrophy that takes place in the cells, the squamous cells of the bronchi. What was hyperplasia? It was the increase in the cellular number, and hypertrophy is the change in the structure of the cells, that is it increases, right? As it increases, it affects the adjacent cells, and the exchange of the gases is difficult, and because of the infection or inflammation, there is fluid secrete, mucus is secreted, it gets infected, and in the symptoms you can mention about constant coughing with a throbbing pain in the chest cavity, definitely mention about the sputum. So for symptoms you will have to mention about the sputum being yellowish or greenish in color. You can talk about constant or persistent coughing that occurs in case of bronchitis, dry cough-like structures, dry cough-like attacks happen when a person is affected due to bronchitis. So all these points will be covered when you are writing the answer, what is meant by bronchitis, causes and symptoms. Then what are the different forms in which carbon dioxide is transported? Usually again a 3 or 4 mark question, never asked for 2 marks because the answer is elaborate, and if it is asked for a 5 mark question, it can be asked, you will have to add a special note on chloride shift. So here you will first write about the percentage of what? Percentage of carbon dioxide being given out or the transported out of the cells in varying percentage. So you will mention about the carbaminohemoglobin, right? You will mention about carbaminohemoglobin. Then how much percentage was that? If you remember correctly, it was around 25, roughly of about 20 to 25%. So this was carbaminohemoglobin. Then major percentage was through formation of bicarbonate ions, that is almost 70%. Then you will also mention about forming carbonic acid in plasma, that is roughly about 5%. So you will have to mention about all the 3. Now that will take care of your 3 marks question.